Thanks, everybody. Great start so far. I want to introduce Jeff Morrison, who is, as everybody knows, Vice President of Global Purchasing and Supply Chain. He's responsible for only about $75 billion in purchasing a year, and GM's about 13,000 suppliers. So probably a few people in this room have worked with GM in the past. As Mary Barra, has said, this is arguably the most transformative time in the auto industry. Before we get to the IRA and some of the challenges, can you talk about, just kind of in broad strokes, how GM is moving to this all-electric future and shifting the supply chain away from internal combustion vehicles to battery electric?
Yeah, absolutely. I also agree with Mary. I think it's the most disruptive time I can ever think of in the automotive industry, and it's not even close. And big trends in terms of moving from ICE propulsion to electric. Obviously, we'll talk a lot about the move to automated driving, really happening in steps and increments, all the way up to fully kind of robo-taxi automated driving, which is really, really exciting. Requires a completely different level of sensing technology and compute power within the vehicle. And then as you think about compute power, moving to more software-defined vehicles. So our complete electrical architecture that exists in the vehicles today is going through a transformation, first from what it was to being able to be updated over the air to now this future state of more centralized compute that has a lot more connectivity on and off the vehicle. And each of these areas, I think, is, from a purchasing and supply chain standpoint, really exciting because it's working really closely with our engineering partners on what it is that we're trying to do, and then with our suppliers, how do we identify those partners for the future, and how do we work to transition with them together going forward? And it's not an easy day ever.
When you think about the shift to EVs, we have three big buckets, right? You have batteries, you've got electronics and electric motors, right? I mean, what are the challenges in sort of reshoring the supply chains for each of those?
So, from a battery standpoint, we've been doing electric vehicles for a number of years, and LG Energy Solutions been our key partner for us. So we started in 2019 with the strategy of, as we were starting with the Ultium platform, this scalable kind of platform that we can do all these different vehicles on, we wanted to make sure that we were manufacturing the battery cells here. And we had two motivations, really. I mean, one is we know that the cost is going to be really challenging, and that we need to drive that relentlessly to be able to offer customers low-cost vehicles. And their ability to actually scale and industrialize in this environment where it's not just us, but it's many other customers around the world that they're trying to do the same with. So we really said that's strategic, and we've got to make sure that we're partnered and really helping them, and that we're intentional about that. With the battery cell, obviously goes all of the other components that make up the battery pack, which there's components today that, if I think about some of the thermal mitigation and management systems that are in the battery, these are parts that have actually never been scaled and industrialized to do the volumes that we're talking about. And so that's one big area that we think about. I think on power electronics and maybe inverters specifically, looking at a footprint and supply base today that needs to evolve. And so we're working on how do we launch with those partners, but then as the technology changes, and I think we, like many others, are seeing an opportunity moving from silicon semiconductors, IGBTs that are in vehicles today, into more silicon carbide MOSFETs, which needs to be industrialized, needs to be scaled. So we've announced a lot of partnerships there. So that's kind of the second tranche. And then the third is really in the EV motors, and so we use permanent magnet motors for the most part. I mean, we have some induction motors, but and these require rare earth magnets, which we know today and is again a very dependent location-dependent commodity for us, right? And so we've done a lot of work with partners to localize and create investment and capacity here in the U.S. for rare earths, and we've announced partnerships to actually produce magnets here as well.
So as John Podesta mentioned, much of the world's battery production is in China, as well as the critical minerals that are used to build those today. We're obviously waiting the guidance from Treasury expected on Friday. But what do you see as sort of the big challenges to shifting that supply chain on the critical mineral side and then on the components as well?
So we, and it was great, listening to the comments at the dinner last night and John Podesta's comments here this morning. It's completely aligned with what we're trying to do. And the way I describe it to people is, we had this strategy probably a year or a year and a half before the IRA came out. So we knew that the capacity that we needed wasn't there. We had to build new capacity, and we wanted to have a more resilient, sustainable value chain that was feeding it than what exists today. So we were already on the path of how do we look at all the critical minerals and all the chemical processing that's required to make battery cell components and battery cells, and how do we re-footprint that, right? And we were looking largely at allied countries that are included in the IRA today. So when the IRA came out, it was nothing but wind in our sails, right? It was completely aligned with what we're doing. So I feel like we had a running start to it. It doesn't make it any less challenging, right? So the challenge is really how do you pick the right partners, and then how do you execute as fast as you possibly can to get there with what ends up being major industrialization projects to do things like cathode active material, sulfating plants for conversion of nickel, manganese, cobalt, hydroxide conversion plants for converting lithium carbonates, which we mainly buy today, into that. And then and precursor plants and recycling plants and anode plants. And so then we looked at it and said, for each of these, we also need to make sure that we secure the feedstock. And so going all the way back to the mines and working on sources of lithium, sources of nickel, sources of cobalt, and it's been a big challenge just in terms of the magnitude of it and the speed that we're trying to go.
Before we get to the IRA, I wanted to ask you about lithium, because GM has announced a couple of major agreements for U.S. lithium production, right, with the Salton Sea and CTR and Thacker Pass. Can you talk about how you thought about those deals and how you sort of think about the environmental concerns?
Yeah, I think on all deals, and I would say it's very cultural within purchasing.
Sorry, I thought that wasn't me, I hope.
Whew, excuse me. Very cultural within purchasing and supply chain, and even within GM. It starts with partnerships, right? So as we look at lithium, we've got a universe of companies that are approaching us, and we're approaching to look at partnerships. And one of the first things we're trying to assess is this a partner that we think is seeking a win-win type of partnership, right? And I won't give you names, but I can give you examples of people that have approached us with a much more opportunistic tone to their voice. So, we've tried to understand what do they need, what do we need, and how do we collectively do that together. And so both of these projects are different, but they're both large in scale. So they start with like great leaders, great partners at both. They're companies that require some co-investment, some support, equity to get going. They're looking for secure offtake, which we can provide. And we know that if you reverse 2 years ago to the market prices for lithium at $7,000 or whatever it was, it's not at a level that's really viable to create new capacity or sustain it. So this idea of floor pricing, I think, is really important for our partners. Likewise, there is no economic model that exists today that says lithium should cost $70,000, right? It's completely absurd. And So we also want to make sure as partners that we're not paying 70,000. So I think this floor ceiling ish type of mechanism I think is really important for what we're doing. We're trying to make EVs affordable and great for customers. We'd like to make money. We'd like our partners to make money. I'd rather not have speculators or others, making the money in this industry, right? And so, but two absolutely great companies that I think offer a lot.
So let's talk about the two halves of the IRA guidance that we're going to get this Friday, right? So the first is on the battery component side, right? That requires 50% of the value to be produced in North America. The other is the critical minerals. That's a 40% from country like the U.S. or countries that the U.S. has a free trade agreement. How sort of doable is that going to be, do you think, in terms of initially for the industry? And do you think, when you look at the GM footprint of vehicles currently getting tax credits, do you think some of those vehicles will initially get dropped to $3,750 or won't get credits at all?
Yeah. So we're anxious, like everybody, I think, to see the final, the final rulings that kind of come forward here. We've seen the white papers. I think we have a pretty good idea of directionally where it's heading. We are very optimistic that we're going to be in a position to qualify fully for the tax incentives and credits, starting now and throughout. But obviously, there's some work that we need to do, and it's going to depend on that final ruling that comes out. I think of it in terms of three phases of what we're trying to industrialize. So we've got today, right, which really is reliant on the footprint that exists, and we're going to launch, and we're going to start. We're going to start launching and growing our battery cell and battery production here in North America. So that's good, but we're going to really be reliant from the critical mineral value chain that exists today, right? The second phase is we'll start to move components of that out of foreign entities of concern into more kind of friend-shored locations. We think that gets us through kind of calendar year 25, gets us the first million EVs that we've talked about pretty publicly. Right. And then really a lot of this new capacity, like the two mines that you're talking about, for lithium, a lot of the other deals that we've announced, this starts to then create, and our CAM joint venture that we have with POSCO in Canada, LG is committed to opening a CAM facility here in likely the U.S. This will provide the capacity that will get us the next million. That's kind of that 26 to 30 time frame. Right.
How challenging is it going to be to meet those 10% yearly increases? Because those two base numbers keep going up annually.
Yeah, and so I think we've got a team that's really modeled that out, and it aligns largely with the timing of a lot of the deals and when that capacity starts to come online. And to do all these, I mean, as you can imagine, we've announced at least a dozen deals. These are large, complex, difficult deals. I think one of the things that we did early on, recognizing the need to be able to go fast on these, was we created a super team within the company, of procurement experts, corp dev, M&A experts, finance experts, policy and government relations experts to really kind of help map this out, and to once we know what we want and we've identified partners, be able to move fast and go. And so that same team has taken the work that they're doing and the pipeline of opportunities, and they're overlaying it with what we believe that ramp in is going to finally look like. And again, I think we feel pretty confident that we've got a plan to achieve it. We'll hope for no surprises here.
But you say a lot of it is really in the details, right, of what's in this guidance, right, in terms of the battery processing rules and what's a component versus what's a mineral. I mean, it sounds very technical, but it really could have a big impact on what these credits look like.
It's important. I mean, I think we've tried to really understand what the laws are trying to accomplish, which we think is completely aligned with what we're trying to do. And we're hopeful that the rules will be consistent with that, right? And so that there's no surprises to it. Obviously, you'd hate to have rules come out that there is a cost to doing what we're doing, right? And we hope over the long term that cost scales and comes down. I would hate to see us, taking on additional cost and incentivizing maybe bad behavior of others as the ruling comes out, right?
But you mentioned, one of the big things you also have to do is manage your internal combustion business, right? Because obviously that accounts for the vast majority of GM's profits today. This is a business that GM intends to exit, maybe potentially by 2035. How do you manage that business and suppliers that are going to be shifting toward EVs? At the same time, you face rising fuel efficiency requirements that require you to make those internal combustion vehicles more efficient, even as they will ultimately you will exit that business.
Yeah, it's a really difficult balancing act right now, right? So it's our ICE vehicle profits are funding our EV future, and we've been very public about that, and it's the reality, right? And so making sure that we earn those profits and produce those vehicles is number one priority for me every single day, right? Over time, we know that volume starts to come down. I think there's a lot of debate about what that ramp down curve looks like and what the ramp up curve looks like for vehicles it replaces. So our Ultium platform is scalable all the way from small SUVs all the way up to full-size trucks. So we can do single layer, double layer packs. So we are in the EV truck business. I drive a Hummer, which, oh my God, is incredible, right? But we're in the EV truck business. So we want to be cautious not to be too aggressive with what we think the ramp down assumption is. We don't want to be too conservative with what we think the ramp up assumption is. So there's this tendency to maybe want to overcapacitize and work. So it's a lot of very detailed, open, transparent discussions with suppliers about what we think this looks like, and then a lot of intentionality around the partners we have today on ICE. What does their future look like with EVs, and how do we manage that together? And not all are involved in commodities and technologies that will be in EVs, right? And so those that aren't, we really are having proactive discussions about how does that future look, and how do we manage that together? But we know that's going to be some challenges as we go forward in terms of suppliers are going to get into financial troubles. We may have new owners that come in and buy pieces of the business or entire businesses that may not have the best intentions, and so we're on the lookout.
And maybe we can sort of close with, obviously during COVID, the industry was hit by the semiconductor shortage, right? And obviously everybody had to work through that, and it cost an enormous amount of production. Are there certain areas in the supply chain for EVs that keep you up at night, or you say to yourself, these are the areas that I'm really concerned that as the industry ramps up toward big EV numbers, that this is a choke point we need to be concerned about?
I love the question, and it's actually the lesson we learned from semiconductors is the importance of engaging deep into the value chain on critical components, right? And having the direct partnerships with the semiconductor suppliers. And I hate the A word, right? I don't want to ever hear the word allocation uttered ever again in my life, right? And so as you think about critical minerals and battery raw materials, we want to be in a position we control our destiny, we have the partnerships, we're engaged at that right level, and I never hear the A word, right? Because we've got security of supply that's coming, and somebody's not looking at us as a transactional partner and saying, hey, I know I said I could do 50,000 tons out of this asset, I can only do 30,000, so you're going to get a 60% allocation like everybody else. Like that will never fly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, well, please give Jeff a big round of applause, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks.